So before I move right on to local authorities and being a lot more specific, I wanted to draw your attention to somebody who had already explored the problem with our theoretical economics that I'm aware of. So I came to this understanding institutions, and I read Keynes and Hayek to understand those institutions, and they're actually we're always largely in agreement. So I was never caught up in the tribalism of 20th century economics, because I was reading the arguments that before that tribalism began. Now, there's an economist called Hyman Minsky, who people look at for financial instability, and he wrote a book about John Maynard Keynes, where he explored how it was that this understanding of instability and institutions that Keynes had was absorbed back into neoclassical economics. And that's one of the things that was really surprising, was very much you could see the trajectory of that. When I arrived at the LSE, you could see that that had happened. But it's also worth looking at Minsky, because what Minsky says is that you have to understand the economy in terms of different types of institutions and how they fit together. You can't just rely on these models, because the models, A, are full of fucking contradictions and bollocks, and, you know, all models are wrong, but some are useful. But B, actually, even in 1985, when he was writing Stabilising an Unstable Economy, he knew that our ageing population, the growing demands of care, the changes to family structure, that these things were well underway, and that in order to accommodate them, we would have to basically understand how different institutions function. Now, this could be terrible. It could be, absolutely. This should be like a terrible situation that, you know, policymakers are dealing with these theoretical models. But actually, we live in a country where we've just had a 70-year period of stability, so not everything's gone wrong here. Something else is happening here. And one of that's what Twitter, I think, has exposed. So when I arrived on Twitter, I was a function that had evolved separately from that belief system, in a bit of the system that they were not aware of. And I was aware that the rule of law develops, that we have people reflecting on it, that we understand how these systems fit at the bottom, and that actually we've got very sophisticated and very well-functioning systems, especially like the systems that have evolved out of our children's legislation and the family courts. While they have huge problems and have been like torture chambers for domestic abuse victims in the last few years, and I have been one of those. Not, you know, I don't want to discuss proceedings, but I was in those family courts in a period where we couldn't get legal aid. You know, that's not fun. But these systems actually work pretty well, and they've evolved, and they're very clever, and they're very complex, and they require lots of tensions to exist, and lots of different functions to exist, including the political and legal function of overseeing responsibilities around looked after children. But these very clever, naturally evolving systems that have been shaped by market forces, including evolutionary forces, have escaped the eye line of economists, and they don't know they exist, and they only understand them as public spending. So one of the benefits that we have is that we're not going from a situation where a belief system falls apart and there's a big vacuum. The belief system falls apart and we just look at the systems that we've got, and they're actually pretty damn fucking good. And the problem is, the process that we're in now is of the belief system falling apart, so that we will look at those systems. And it's taking fucking ages, and it's not fun. But once that belief system has fallen apart, while it might be bad for The Guardian, and it might be bad for the fucking Labour Party, and it might be bad for people in think tanks, in actual fact it's no loss of anything, because it just means we have to look at these systems, and actually these systems are immensely clever, immensely mature. And they're not made of things that come from the top, they're made of thousands and thousands of people who believe in these principles that they're upholding. And one of the reasons that our systems don't fall apart is because of that. And what you see through TERF is the way that people will stand up and uphold safeguarding as that relationship. Even if it looks like major institutions are saying, no, we won't, we say, yes, we fucking will. And you won't push past us. Jessica Eaton wrote a phrase that was really, really accurate. And one of the things that you're taught to do as a social worker is when you're challenging power dynamics, you have to be really sure-footed. You have to put your feet down, and you have to stay there and plant them in the ground and then face off rage. And that's all I've been doing since 2010, because the rule of law always existed and we're going to go back to it. But now what's happened is organisations like The Guardian, the Labour Party, like the think tanks, like even the Conservatives, are having to face that they don't understand these systems. And the problem is that in order to face that they don't understand these systems, they're also going to have to face the harm that these systems have done. And that's the learning that's going to come through for local authorities. And that's the learning that exists in local authorities, that in order to reflect on the evolving rule of law, as Hayek said, you have to reflect on the harm that state intervention does. And that's the next question I'm going to look at.